Hello, this is Chris Heasley with the Chris Heasley Radio Show. David Hamilton is a trustee in the Fort Bend Independent School District. David serves on the board of Fort Bend Schools. And as a trustee, David Hamilton is a public servant. He is a public servant to the people of Fort Bend County. And as such, in his capacity as a trustee and as a public servant, David has a duty and an obligation to make the people of Fort Bend County completely aware of all of the issues, the challenges, the state of affairs, all of the matters pertaining to Fort Bend Independent School District. And with that being said, David has a full obligation to full transparency to the people of Fort Bend when it comes to Fort Bend schools. And with that being said, David was faced with a challenge. And that challenge is that David was presented with materials that were being stored in the Fort Bend Independent School District libraries. And these were materials of a very explicit nature. These were pornographic materials that were located in the Fort Bend school libraries. And these materials were beyond reprehensible. They were barbaric and highly objectionable. And to give you an idea, these materials, they were not just simply a romance novel of young teenagers or high school kids in a makeout session or a married couple having an intimate moment. It was nothing like that. The materials that were presented to David Hamilton were hardcore pornography. They were explicit pictures and vivid descriptions of sexual acts. And it wasn't just everyday sex. It was very crude materials and sex with a strong element of violence in it. It was concepts and ideas that in no way, shape, or form should be presented to the children in our schools. But these materials were in the Fort Bend school libraries, and these are the materials that the children in Fort Bend schools are reading when they go to the library. And so David was faced with a challenge because he understands that everybody in Fort Bend, we all love our schools. We love the Fort Bend schools. They are something that we value. They give us a sense of pride in Fort Bend County. We love our schools. We love our teachers. We love our librarians. We love our administrators. We love everything about Fort Bend schools. And the reason we love them is because we give them our most precious persons. We place our children in their hands for them to caretake, for them to develop and grow and help us turn them into adults. And we understand that our schools will have a tremendous impact on the children of Fort Bend County. And for that reason, we love our schools. And the idea that the most heinous materials are being distributed to our children from our schools is quite frankly hard to believe. And David, when he was presented these materials, he understood that he had this duty to transparency, but he also understood that if he told people about these materials, there was a very good chance people would not believe him, and there would be a credibility issue. David simply understood that sometimes you cannot tell the people, you have to show the people. And so what he did is he led a campaign of text messages and through social media where he presented these materials to the parents in Fort Bend County so that they could see with their own eyes what their children are reading when they're at school. And what happened is this and so the parents of Fort Bend, they fully understood where David was coming from. They understood the matter at hand. And this culminated in a night at the Fort Bend Independent School District board meeting where the community came together as one, and us parents, we all came together and we read these books together. And we had to sit through the most disgusting, gruesome materials, but it was a valuable exercise because at the end we had no illusions about the disturbing nature of these books. We fully understood what our children were being exposed to. But you see, this exercise of discovering the problem, that only scratched the surface because it didn't tell us from where this came from. And we understand that in order to solve a problem, we have to de-root the problem. We have to find it at its source. In order to take out a bee's nest, you have to find the queen bee. And that was the question before us. Who was responsible for putting this in motion? And that was the question that we had. And during this endeavor, it is very important to note that we never blamed the schools. We do not blame the schools. We largely see the schools as a scapegoat. They are a victim, just like the children are a victim to this, just like the parents are a victim to this. Our schools are a victim to this as well. Because the truth is that it is an outside element that is infiltrating our schools, a nefarious outside actor that has infiltrated our schools. And make no question about it, whoever did this had very bad intentions. There is no legitimate reason for doing what they did. They had one thing in mind, and their purpose was to hurt children. They intended to harm our children. Because the materials that were presented were so egregious, there is no argument that exists that a child should be reading those materials, should be seeing those pictures, those descriptions. There's no argument. The purpose of putting those materials there was to hurt the children. The purpose was to pervert their minds and corrupt their intentions. And this is the question that we have to ask ourselves, is what kind of a person, what kind of an adult wants children to begin thinking about sex? What kind of an adult wants children to think about having sex? What kind of adult thinks about children having sex? And this question presents another question, which is there a pedophile element infiltrating our schools? That's the question in front of us. Is there a seriously nefarious intent intended for our schools, our children? And the question becomes, who lobbied the schools to put those materials in there? Who did it? Who was the lobbyist? Who did that lobbyist work for? And who was funding that lobbyist? And then the second question is what political party are they affiliated with? These are the questions in front of us. And these questions, this incident requires the community at large to begin asking these questions, because the school board cannot fix this on their own. They require community support. And so the question becomes, who did this? Who put this in motion? And what political party are they working with? And I cannot answer all those questions, but I do have one item that may give some idea of who is in one way aiding and abetting this grooming effort in our schools. And what I will tell you about is something called House Bill 900. House Bill 900 was introduced by the Republicans and passed into law. And what House Bill 900 did is it punished any publisher that would place in our schools illicit materials. It punished them by not allowing them to, if they distributed any of these materials to the schools, they would be prevented from ever selling a book to the schools again. House Bill 900. And House Bill 900 passed. And you would think, just with common sense, that every Texas state representative would vote for House Bill 900, because it is only common sense that our children should not be exposed to these materials. But you would in fact be wrong, because in fact, every state representative out of the Fort Bend County area voted against House Bill 900. Every state rep out of Fort Bend voted against prohibiting these pornographic materials in our schools. These state reps voted for this grooming effort to continue, and I will name those reps out of Fort Bend County. Those reps are Solomon Lulani out of Fort Bend County voted against prohibiting these pornographic materials in the schools. Gene Wu and Ron Reynolds, all state reps out of Fort Bend County, all voted against House Bill 900. The House Bill 900 was proposed to stop this infiltration of these sick and disgusting materials in our schools, and all three reps out of Fort Bend County voted against House Bill 900. And this is the Chris Heasley Show. And on this show, we will give you all of the ideas, all the content, all of the information that you need to take back your counties, your cities, your towns, your country. And we always advocate for activism at the local level first. And we'll give you all the ideas. And at the same time, there's an obligation on your part. And the obligation is that you get involved locally. And on this episode, we simply have one task for you to do. And that is for you to call your state reps in Fort Bend County and ask them why they voted against House Bill 900. Call Ron Reynolds, call Solomon Lulani, and call Gene Wu and ask them why they would vote against House Bill 900. And this is the Chris Heasley Show. And on today's show, we have two guests. On the line, we have G2. G2, are you there?
I am. Good afternoon.
Forgot to put my headphones on. I'm getting a little. I'm having a little problem with my headphones.
A little technical challenge.
1 second, sir. Can you help me fix these, please? And in the studio, we have David Olson. And David is running for the Katy ISD, the Katy Independent School District board. He's running to be a trustee on the Katy ISD school, and I had a little problem there with my headphones, so I apologize for that. So G2, I think I can hear you a little bit better now.
Good.
Excellent, very good. And so what we're going to do today is David Olson is one person who stepped up to bat. He is a community member in the Katy district. David is not from Fort Bend, but he's in Katy ISD. Katy has the same set of issues in their school district. And this got to such a point that he could not sit on the sidelines before. He's a man that never, I don't believe, ever entertained political office. But because we are in such deep water, he stepped out of his comfort zone and got into local activism and got into the fight for our country, taking back our country. And before we get into that issue, David, I just want to introduce you and say thank you very much for being on the show.
I appreciate the time. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Very good. So my first question for you is, if you can just give us an idea about yourself and what motivated you to get into this political arena.
Yes, so I'm a graduate of University of Texas, Bachelor of Chemical Engineering. Lived in Katy ISD for the last 15 years plus. My wife of 22 years is an employee of the district. My two children have either graduated or are still currently enrolled in KISD. So I have a vested interest in the district and its path forward.
Excellent, very good. 1 second there, just making sure everything's copacetic in the studio. Oh, great. Okay, so and G2, were you able to hear David's answer?
I did.
Okay, very good, good. I just want to make sure everything technically is in line. With that being said, okay, great. So, what was the momentous event that caused you to throw your hat in the ring and enter a campaign for political office?
So the point in time would have been the August board meeting for Katy ISD and the policy of parental authority and gender fluidity. The following day on Tuesday, I'm working from home listening to Michael Berry, and he is going off about a vote in the KDSD board. And as I did my research online and looked at the vote, I realized that people on the board who I thought shared my values and beliefs didn't and voted against parental rights and parental authority. At that point in time, that was my tipping point. Like you said, this is my first time running for any political office. I'd like to think I was engaged in politics to a certain point, maybe not so much the local level. When this vote happened, I texted a family friend of ours and said, I can't take it anymore. I'm done. I'm running. This is my tipping point. I have kids in the district. Somebody's telling me I don't have a right to know about my child at school, about anything. I have a problem with that. As much as you push on the mama bears, the dads are now stepping up and just as strong as the mama bears do in the district.
Explain that one vote that happened. Go into more detail about that vote and what caused you to step into the ring and go for it.
Yeah, so I brought the policy here, so I don't misquote anything, just to cover. But in section 1.3 of the policy, it's under parental authority. It states a parent's role in guiding the beliefs and protecting the health and well-being of their children is paramount. A parent has the right to full information concerning their student, except as limited by law. An attempt by the district or any district employee to encourage or coerce a student to withhold information from their parent is grounds for disciplinary action. A parent is entitled to access all records of the district concerning the parent's child, including health and immunization information, teacher and school counseling and evaluation, reports of behavior patterns, and other items. And then finally, the district will only withhold information to the extent authorized by law and only to the minimum extent necessary. What that told me is the people who voted against this policy, thank goodness this policy is in place, told me I'm excluded from my child's education and what's going on in school. If my child is injured, pulled in an ambulance and goes to hospital, they're not calling the school, they're calling me. If my child, heaven forbid, would be arrested, involved with police, the police is not calling the school, they're calling me. If I'm responsible for his health and well-being, food, shelter, clothing, I have a right to know what's going on with him in the school. And the vote they took, the incumbent I'm running against, Don Champagne, voted against this policy. As they're trying to run from the record right now, we show the vote, as stated on the board, that they voted against this policy, they voted against parental rights.
Okay, so real quick, this was it was a school level rule, a school level policy put in place. It wasn't a state law or anything of that sort.
At Katy ISD, it was passed 4-3, so common sense did prevail. It should have passed 6-1, but apparently the outside noises of the minority put pressure on the two incumbents to vote against the policy, which is why myself and then my colleague Donovan Campbell have both stepped up to run.
And the policy, what it does is, to put it in just basic terms, is that if a child expresses questions regarding their sexuality, it requires the school personnel to report that to the parent. If the child comes to a school personnel and discusses something about their sexuality, the school personnel are required to go and bring that to the parent. Is that correct?
That's correct. There are kind of 3 points to that. Obviously, we talk about biological boys not allowed in girls' restrooms, biological boys not allowed to play girls' sports. The final issue is if your child comes to a teacher or a school official wishing to be called by a different pronoun or different name other than their biological sex, the school would then notify the parents. The parents would come into the school, sit down, and just let them know, hey, your child is expressed to be called differently than their biological sex. And it's more of just a notification. It's nothing else to that. The fact that people would vote against that notification part is the problem.
For me, this is. I mean, I guess I'm in awe, just like you are. How could anyone justify not informing a parent of something so vital as that? What kind of rationale do they use?
They'll say, well, it was a poorly written policy or it needed more debate. You know, KDSD typically has a work study meeting and then the following week the board meeting. And that work study meeting is really the heart of going through the policies and what's on the agenda, whether it's budget or these kinds of things. And you work through that during the week. We have a policy committee on the board, set up of 3 board members who develop these policies. There was also a lot of noise, well, this doesn't happen in KDSD, why do we need this? Well, you have these people on the left and right coast, and you see what happens in Virginia and other states, and those parents who wish to stand up for common sense are labeled extremists. No, we just stand for common sense and we stand for our children in our school. As you said, we're trusting our district with our students for 8 hours a day, for 100 and whatever days per year. We expect to be informed on their progress academically, socially, extracurricular, and not be withhold secrets.
And the question is, who is the extremist, right? So they call you the extremist because you want to know all of the intimate details about your child, and they call you that. They call you the extremist. But isn't really the extremist the person that is saying that the state can withhold information from you about your child?
Exactly. You always hear the story, it takes a village to raise your child. No, it doesn't really take a village. It takes the family to raise our child. Yes, we need a small army to support our district because districts are so understaffed and parental involvement is essential. When you tell parents they don't have the right to know what's going on, how do you think that's going to impact parental involvement when you call and ask for those people to support you? It's the challenge. I'm heavily involved with my children. They were both band people, loading crews. I was on those loading crews every Friday night football games, Saturday contests. They need our parental involvement for these things to function. And when you tell them, well, we need your help here, but we're not going to tell you what's going on, at some point you lose that parental involvement. And we are the PTA. The last time I checked, P actually stood for parent.
Well, it seems that it's this constant theme coming from the left, coming from the Democrats, where they want to wrestle away the autonomy of the child from the parent, and they want the state to step into that void. And I will just give a couple of examples. Number one, when they did the mask mandates. They did the mask mandates on a virus that had a near 100% survival rate and showed no signs of any harm to children, and yet the Democrats wanted the masks to be placed on the child regardless of parental consent. That's just one example. Now you have this, and then you have this issue where if a child comes and expresses questions about their sexuality, the parent will not know that, but the school will, right? So they're taking another decision point away from you. But then if you look at the recent school choice vote, where the Republicans had this school choice package that was considered to be one of the best ever proposed in the country's history, where the parents would be in the driver's seat to decide on the educational institution for the child, and the Democrats stopped in and canceled that. So it just seems like in every way, shape, and form, they don't want you to be in the driver's seat when it comes to the development of your child.
Yeah, that's correct. The leftists, the extremists, they're always standing between you and your child. We talk about, school choice, educational savings accounts. Katy ISD does a great job in academic success and preparing for our kids for future endeavors, whether it's 2 4-year universities, vocational trades, which is desperately needed, or even those who are called to serve our country. However, there are certain districts who don't have those same resources that Katy does. Now, I'm pro-public education. A wife works for the district, kids who've gone through Katy ISD. Yes, the state needs to step up and do their due diligence. This whole mess in the legislature of school vouchers, school choice, tied up with the general funds, until that decouples, we are where we are. I fully expect the state to support, fully fund education. Having said that, it is not my right to tell other parents, especially in failing districts, I look at HISD taking over the state, to tell them, hey, you got to keep your child at a failing school, doesn't matter, no opportunity for success, no opportunity to do better than you did. That's not my right as a person at all, and I'm not going to tell somebody to do that. But I will support, pro-public education because I'm vested in Katy ISD. My kids are products of that. They've been successful. Wife works for the district. I will always support Katy ISD.
Well, I think that it also presents one other question. So the child has questions about their sexuality. They go to their school personnel, and then the left does not want that personnel to be required to tell the parent. And the question becomes: so we know now that they sort of want to withhold information from the parent, but at the same time, there are these pornographic books being dropped in the library to groom the children, and in every way, shape, and form, it looks like a nefarious, under the radar, subversive intent to groom the children. Is there any other way to interpret it?
I don't know how to interpret that. As someone who wasn't totally involved in the district until now, you plead a little bit of ignorance. Maybe I had the blinders on and didn't want to know. One thing COVID did, of all the downside of COVID, the fact that there was some in-home learning, parents realized what's going on with their child in school and realized, what are you learning about? How is this reading, writing, and arithmetic? How is this STEM-based? I think the left always distracts us with these little high-level things over here, while underneath, subversing, sneaking stuff in, people won't realize. And we have a lot of parents in KSD who got active in the district, in the schools, and challenging what is going on. Why are these things in our libraries what is the academic value of these books? I mean, again, like you said, it's basically softcore porn for the most part. Why is this here? If this is so important that your child needs to know about this, I know a company that can ship that to you in 2 days, and you can take that in a house, and that could be yours. But as part of my taxpayers and public funds, why am I paying for these books to be in the library? And you'll hear the terms, the left likes to use book bans. No, these are book reviews for appropriate material. What's appropriate for elementary, what's appropriate for secondary schools. We're not banning books. We're making sure the books are appropriate for the kids in the district.
G2, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's interesting to hear the way you describe it, of course, is correct. And when I look at the Houston Chronicle and go back to articles that they wrote last year around book banning in the Katy Independent School District, they write articles in a way to try to make it seem like, first of all, it is book banning, and secondly, it's silly on its face because the books being banned are not books that should be considered banned. Dr. Seuss books and other books. The reality is, the way you described it is correct, and this is true across the nation. What has happened on a nationwide basis in good school systems that traditionally score high and are valued, people move to school districts like these to get their students, their children exposed to better education, and in the inner city school districts where people aren't moving in to get to that school district, they're just stuck in those school districts. In all of those, including private schools, these bizarre books, this child pornography has crept into the school system. And when Katy ISD put in a policy to try to push those out, and along with that, when a couple of books, like a Dr. Seuss book, the Houston Chronicle jumps on that, starts screaming book banning and trying to make it seem silly. Having looked at the books that have been in schools all over the country, I can tell you it's not silly. It is unimaginable to the average citizen that child pornography could actually end up in schools, but I'm telling you it's in schools everywhere. And when you've got a school system as big as Katy ISD, I think you have about 95,000 students.
No, 96,000, right? Yes. It's fifth largest in the state.
96,000? So that's one of the largest in the nation by a long shot. You're spending about $14,000 per student. So there's clearly no money problem. Money is not the issue in Katy ISD. The issue is making sure that the focus on education is really on education, science, math, history, the languages, and all of that. So I think it is good to see that the school system is pushing that out. It is unfortunate that the Houston Chronicle portrays that as somehow book banning or as some radical or silly thing that parents are doing. And when you tell me that the school systems are blocking parents from knowing what's going on with their children, there is no excuse for that other than the school systems want to indoctrinate your kids in something they don't want you to know about.
Right.
There is no legitimate excuse, and I don't care what culture you're in, what demographic you're in the United States, except for the small group of people who are these sort of radical leftists. Outside of them and these sort of gender-obsessed, people, outside of those groups, no one believes that students should not, that the critical elements of their students' daily life in school should be hidden from their parents. So it's good to hear you talk about parents' rights as a critical focus, because it's not just in Texas, not just in York County, it's nationwide that parents' rights in education are under assault.
And follow up, I listened to a recent podcast with Dr. Phil. He is the same mindset, and I wouldn't define him as an extremist. He's pretty well respected left and right. His same point about keeping secrets from parents and this, from what's going on in schools, he was totally against that as well. It doesn't set good precedents. It doesn't set good moral behavior long term. And Dr. Phil,
no,
not a right wing nut.
No, but where you would find that being an acceptable practice would be in totalitarian cultures, like in the Soviet years, in the Soviet Union. They would have, if you had a child that was good at sports, for example, they would take that child, put them in a sports program, and you might not see them for years. They felt like they owned those children. The children belong to the nation. If you listen to the rhetoric on corporate media today, I'm talking about the radicals like the Houston Chronicle and the CNBCs and MSNBCs, you'll hear some of the commentators come on and say the experts in the schools should decide how your child is educated, and parents should not have a voice in that, and frankly shouldn't really be involved. That is a decidedly Marxist Soviet kind of attitude that people came to this country to escape.
G2, I want to ask you something. So we uncovered two developments in this show so far, which is number one, that the porn is being dropped in the libraries. It's being done quietly without the attention of the parents, without the approval or consent of the parents. You have these pornographic materials being exposed to children. That's number one. Then number two, when these children read the stuff and then they begin to question their sexuality, the schools are stepping in and saying, we don't necessarily want you to tell that to your parents. They're attempting to shield the parents in every way, shape, and form. The parents' interests are bringing the children up into becoming good adults. Again, I am not blaming the schools in this. I'm saying there's an outside element that is infiltrating our Texas schools. Okay, but my question is, what is the end goal? That's the question. First of all, any normal person would know you do not drop those materials in a library. That's number one. Number two, any person would know that if a child has those kind of questions, go to mommy and daddy. They'll tell you about the birds and the bees. That's been the standard since the beginning of time. Only with someone with malintent, adults who have bad intentions for children would be dropping these policies in. What do you think their end goal is?
Well, first of all, one of the points you made in that point in your comment was that the schools don't know. And I will tell you, or that you're not blaming the schools, there's an outside force. Yes, there's an outside force, but it is the school directors that are supposed to be in place to defend the schools from these outside forces, to use their judgment to make certain that what comes into that school environment is specifically and completely focused on educating the child and preparing them for life, not warping them into some indoctrinated, child, or letting predators prey upon their sexual naivete or take advantage of them. What's the end goal? Well, in every indoctrination program, there's an end goal. Children are developed and indoctrinated to believe certain things. So in a lot of schools today, there's a political element that is decidedly the globalist or leftist agenda, more of the communist sort of thinking in regular terms. And then with this grooming, with putting these kind of explicit materials in schools, if you go into some high schools in some states, you'll see a tremendous number of gender and sexually oriented materials up on the walls as decorations, up on poster boards. It's not natural for schools to be so focused on gender. Why are they? Well, because they're grooming children for a different kind of reality. There's so much pressure on students today to express themselves differently than simply being male and female. If you want to get a lot of applause at school, there are only a couple of ways to do it now. One, score points at a sport event. That'll get you applause. Maybe succeed academically. But if you stand up and say that you are not male or female, you're some other thing, you will be called courageous and brave. You will be applauded. You will get, you'll get all the attention you ever wanted. So it's sort of a predatory thing that's going on as you go from school district to school district. But I do find that where you've got strong school board members that are operating with common sense and with the best interests of the children and their educations in mind, there's less of this. And where you've got these radical, globalist, leftist ideologues, these gender-focused ideologues that have long resumes of being involved in academics. They could be around universities a lot. They could be in the school systems a lot. It seems that being in that environment, they become more likely to be supporting this and advancing this radical agenda, both political and sexual.
And to give an idea,
it just seems unbelievable to me that we have these conversations and they're real, but that's just where America is today.
And to give an idea of the degree, this is something that we cannot be dismissed. I mean, this is a political movement that has serious momentum. Again, I want to state reps Solomon Lulani, Ron Reynolds, and Gene Wu all represent the Fort Bend County area, and they all voted against stopping this stuff. They all voted against the one amendment that was proposed, House Bill 900, that would put a serious damper or possibly even completely prevent this from happening again, and they would not support that bill. You have on that side, you have on the Democrat side in Fort Bend County, they do not want to talk about this issue. They're quietly supporting this indoctrination, this grooming of our children. And then David presents today that in Katy ISD, that there was a considerable number of people on the actual school board that also were voting likewise on a different matter, but also voting against the interests of the parents and the children. And I just, David, I'll ask you, I am completely baffled. How does this sick set of ideas, how do they have a political movement behind them?
Yeah, I don't know. The two people who are up for re-election no longer have children in the district. So what I would say is schools today are much different than they were pre-pandemic. A line I'll talk to people is before the pandemic, is believe all women. Now it's what is a woman? And you see people who can't even answer the question when pressed for Supreme Court nominees. What is a woman? I don't know what their intent is or why they voted the way they did. Again, I think it's bowing to political pressure, the loudest voices in the room, because in that board meeting in August, a number of speakers brought in outside the district the loudest voices, screaming, the vitriol against the current board members who supported the policy. They have to answer that question to the public. And right now, they haven't been able to answer it. Instead, they say we were misrepresenting the vote. Well, I've got a copy of the vote right here as it was made. I've read the policy. I don't know how it was misrepresented. They say it was bad policy. Well, I will say, they could have abstained from the vote and taken this neutral ground like Switzerland and avoided some of this controversy. They voted against it. So they have to run on that record. We get back to the books. The nice part is with Katy ISD, they have a book review policy in place. So all new books that are requested to be in the libraries must go through a public review. The librarian is supposed to review these books. And if books are deemed inappropriate, they can get pulled off. The bigger problem is the books that are already in the library that need to be rooted out as these pop up. And there's still, every library seems to have them. And we have parents sending the letters to the district, hey, this book is inappropriate, title, and they'll do counts of the words, pictures, the soft porn, whatever it may be. That's the thing is now we're trying to pull those out. We've kind of stopped it for the new books. It's getting the ones that have already been in there, have been infiltrated over the last 10, 50, 12, however long. Back in my day at school, most controversial book was probably The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. I say that book was written because of the historical content it was written in, and that's why the words are. I don't know what the historical content is of these books that are coming out now.
I have one.
Well, let me address that.
Mm-hmm.
I want to give you some historical context. I'm going to read to you from the congressional record. That's the record that tracks all the statements made on the floor of the United States Congress. And the congressional record, January 10, 1963, a representative named Herlong stood up to lay out the current communist goals. This is January 10, 1963, current communist goals. Item 40, discredit the family as an institution, encourage promiscuity and easy divorce. Item 41, emphasize the need to raise children away from the negative influence of parents, attribute prejudices, mental blocks, and retarding of children to suppressive influence of parents. I'll give you one more, and this is item 26. Present homosexuality, degeneracy, and promiscuity as normal, natural, and healthy. So if you go and ask yourself where it's coming from, the answer is these have been long-standing goals put in place by folks that sought to subvert everything that made America great in January of 1963. This is the Communist Party agenda that has been making that long march through the institutions from then until now. We're just simply seeing it manifest now in front of us in a way that we could never have imagined just 5 or 10 years ago.
Well, I think that the globalist agenda is a communist agenda. And the one thing that continues to reveal itself is that when we think of globalism, we think, most likely Joe Biden is dedicated to the globalist agenda, but we sort of separate it when we go to the local level. We don't want to think that our local representatives are implementing a globalist agenda. We find it hard to believe that the globalist agenda would reach down. It'd be so impervious, so strong and formidable that would reach down into the local level, to our local school boards, to our state representatives. But I think that it cannot be more clear that these local representatives are not representing the interests of the people of Texas. They're not representing the interests of the people of Harrison, Fort Bend County. They are representing some sort of a foreign interest. And they seem to be operatives in some sort, operatives of the globalist agenda is what it seems like to me. Do you have anything to say on that, David?
Yeah, not really. I mean,
I know we're going deep.
Yeah,
you're running for school board, and I'm asking you about geopolitical politics nationally.
Well, ask me in 2045 on that one.
Yeah.
When I do the block walking in the day-to-day and meeting people doors, a lot of people who have kids in this district, a lot have pulled their kids out of district, homeschooling. And then I start to ask, well, what was your desire to do homeschooling? And they talk about these issues that are popping up, the social-emotional learning issues. They've gone away from the whole STEM or just basic reading, writing, and arithmetic. And that's where, they still pay taxes. So they do have a vested interest. Their kids still have to socialize with KDC kids. So they do have an indirect impact of what's going on, and their voices need to be heard as much as they say, well, you're not in this district. It doesn't matter. You pulled your kids out. You've said your say. I say, well, no, they're still part of our community, and their voices need to be heard, and what their concerns are need to be brought to the broader community.
What it seems like to me, David, in my short time knowing you, make a personal observation is that you seem to have no interest in a political career. You simply want this one endeavor, Fort Bend School, Katy ISD, Katy Schools, for the purposes of rectifying this issue that we have in our school systems. Because in the short conversations we've had, you always seem to want to give power back to the people. You, in school choice, you sort of agree with school choice to some extent. It wouldn't be a matter that you would cover as a trustee, but you can understand it. With regard to transparency in the schools, everything that's come through is that you want to be fully transparent with the schools. And those are indications that you have the best intentions in mind. But let's go ahead and get off of this darker subject, and let's talk about a vision for Katy Schools. What is your vision for the future of Katy Schools?
Well, Katy is one of the high-growth districts in the state of Texas. So as we continue to see students and parents and families who move in, because they move into the academics of Katy ISD. So the first thing is to maintain our academic excellence. Second thing is we have a serious teacher retention problem. Speaking with a rep who's running for U.S. or state rep, the state of Texas is short about 55,000 teachers. So that's across the state. Katy ISD has the same issues, and we're opening new schools, new middle school, new high school this fall. Teacher retention is a serious problem, and in fact, the board has formed a committee for teacher retention. What we're finding so far is teachers are leaving the district not because of compensation or pay. That's, if you're becoming a teacher, you're not becoming a teacher because of the stellar pay. You have a higher calling to serve the public interest and to work with our children. They're leaving because of the bureaucracies that they deal with in the district, or to a point they're verbal abuse to potential physical violence. Not so much here, but you see on the news where students assaulting teachers. They're worried about that. And the big thing is, being in the private industry, we try to simplify, make things easier, simplification. A public entity, by its nature, is going to be so bureaucratic. How much bureaucracy we have to do? My wife in transportation has to deal with the same bureaucracy. She started as a bus driver, got one of these flyers with her kids that came home, answered the call, now is in transportation, but still has to drive because just like teachers, we're short bus drivers as well, opening new schools. It's a whole nother problem. The bureaucracy that I see of just the process of getting things done, the teachers need to focus to teach. Yes, they have to abide by certain things. They have to deal with the state, the STAR test and stuff like that, and all those kinds of issues as well. But there's so much other bureaucracy that they just need to focus on teaching. And the district and administrators need to support that and let them deal with that. If we can just get some of that out of the way, I think that helps the teacher retention problem. And then discipline. We've gone, it's a generational issue with now, back in my day and probably your day as well, teachers were Mr. and Mrs. and Miss. A lot of that may be gone right now. It's hey, you, dude, whatever the words you want to use. The lack of respect, that started outside of school. That started in a home. And that's a whole another issue, probably for a different show. Those things, if you can take care of those things at a younger age and still respect and discipline, it makes for a better person later in life versus where you don't have that respect and discipline. You're losing good teachers, having to bring in with new teachers, less experienced, less seasoned, still qualified teachers, but we're losing a lot of experience going out the door, which contributes to our academic excellence. And we want to maintain those teachers as long as possible.
G2, do you have any observations on the state of Katy ISD today?
Well, when you look at what you're talking about with the teachers, you've got, what do you got, about 5,800 teachers in that school district. You've got about a ratio of 16 students per teacher, which is pretty good, and you've got a substantial support staff to do what you described and keep the support work away from the teachers so they can focus on education. So you've got a good foundation there. But obviously, with the kind of growth you're seeing, and when you're seeing the kind of burden that's being put on schools by the federal government and others, that's a really important focus, keeping those teachers focused on teaching. Because, yeah, if they wanted to be a bureaucrat, they would have done something different for a living, right?
Exactly.
So I think what you're talking about is logical and smart and makes sense in terms of what has to happen to continue to provide good education for students in the world in which we find ourselves. So I think that makes a lot of sense. When you've got that kind of teacher count, when you've got literally thousands of teachers, if you lose, you really can't afford to lose any, because obviously your population is growing, and you definitely do not want to get to the point where you're at that 20-25 student to teacher ratio, which will result in a degradation of the quality of the education. Am I about on track there?
Yeah, I think so. I have one of my children was diagnosed in the spectrum, and the nice part about KDSD is they recognize these things and provide extra support for them. So building on his social skills, building on what are academic skills. He was mainstream, graduated with the rest of his class, went to college, now became homesick, so he's back here, community college, which is fine. It's actually great for my budget. That's good as well. But, KDSD does have a lot of strengths. And, I don't want to always badger the district. KDSD has a tremendous amount of strengths and positives. But with that, you can find a negative really easy because there's so many positives. And we want to make sure we can make everything a positive, which is why we focus on some of these negatives that are really popping up and are the big items.
So can you give us an idea of the state of what is the fiscal state? I know here in Fort Bend County, we are at a financial deficit in multiple ways at the Fort Bend ISD. What is the fiscal state of Katy ISD?
Similar to probably every district in the state. Everybody is seeing deficits. Part of it is the state legislature with their special sessions. They couldn't get these budgetary issues between the general budget and school choice passed, so we're all seeing it now hit. Now, I would argue, especially our incumbents will tout their experience. Well, these budgetary issues just don't show up overnight. This is a slow build. And so if their experience has allowed us to teacher retention problems, budgetary issues, and inappropriate material in the library, that's their legacy they have to run on. The challenges now is we have to, make drastic decisions without impacting the child's education, which, I'm not on the board yet, so I'm not going to make those. District is starting to come out with those issues. But this was a problem that didn't just pop up in 2024. This has been a slow build. And you could see it when they're going over some budget stuff. They're losing COVID funds. Oh, I could have predicted when COVID funds started coming out that every municipal entity that took COVID funds, that was a stopgap. That was not long-term supply of funds. When it's gone, what are you going to do? And here it is gone. There's a little budget because of that. Well, shame on them for that. This is a slow build. It'll be a slow build to fix. We hope the state, and it won't be this year because of an election year, in 2025 can kind of get this past us, get the funds back to the district that's out there. It's over $20 billion sitting out there ready for the districts, but it's coupled up with school choice until they can separate those two or come to an agreement. We're kind of at the mercy of the state based on what's going on right now.
So the state has funds that they're holding up that are hold up. The school choice bill failed, so I don't understand how that's an issue.
It's tied together as one bill. So the general funds and school choice, school vouchers, educational savings account, it's all in one bill. What we're asking, and our current board members and administration let's separate these into two different bills. Let's get the funds out there that are already earmarked for the districts to be spent, and then let's deal with school choice as a separate bill. Right now, they're tied together. So until they can separate those, or you get new leadership in the House, because all this is passed in the Senate in Texas. It's stuck at the House level. That's a quagmire in itself. Yes, democracy is messy. It's the greatest system we have on the planet. Until they can get those two things separated or come to agreement, the districts are waiting on that. So it's not just Katy ISD, I'm sure Cy-Fair, is it Fort Bend ISD, all districts are seeing these shortfalls and having to deal with it at this point in time.
Is there a chance the school choice comes back as a bill, as a proposal, as something to be voted on?
It'll come back, whether it's a separate bill or still tied together, remains to be seen. But in this, with election year, everyone's running for office, nothing's going to happen the rest. I can't see anything happening where Abbott calls another special session to try to address this. He's more looking for people to share his mindset, to change the House side, and then get these bills passed. So that's my crystal ball. I have no insight to that. It's the David Olson thinks of politics. It's probably 2025.
I have to agree. Yeah. G2, we got about 6 minutes. Do you have any last questions for David?
Well, just coming back to what you were just talking about, if you look at the funding in the general fund for Katy ISD, it's about 52% comes from the local taxes. So that's what's coming out of the local population. I think people generally assume it's a much bigger number than that. The state that you're talking about, where funds are being held up, accounts for about 45% of the overall funding for Katy ISD. So those state funds are critical to the operation. They're critical to the schools functioning properly. And it will be interesting to see how the state deals with this issue because, as you know, many school systems, school choice has become a critical element of getting the children to have a good education because they simply have to have the option to walk away from their failing school system in order to get an education at all. So it's going to be interesting to see how that issue is resolved in this year. And you're probably correct. They'll probably end up just releasing the money and dealing with school choice in the next session. But this is definitely something to watch.
In Katy, are the people of Katy apprehensive about school choice, or are they okay with it?
You get both sides. You get the people who are worried, well, if it's school choice, there's funds pulled away from the district for my student. Even though you have already people who are homeschooled, so there's extra funds out there compared to the amount of kids in the district who aren't in schools. I think the state desires to still fully fund the districts while providing some type of avenue for educational savings accounts or school choice, whatever the case may be. The state hasn't moved their basic allotments since 2019, 2020. That's another conversation. That then is flatlined, yet inflation has taken off through the roof. I see it at the grocery store. I'm sure you see it. We see it everywhere. Yet the state's funding has been flat through all that. So that's another challenge that's going on. The state, as much as we moan about Texas legislature, it's still, I think it's the best state in the union. That's why I live here. They just need to kind of finally come together, do their due diligence, and let's get something passed so that the districts can move on and get back to business as usual.
I guess what I was asking, though, is are Katy residents concerned that if school choice becomes an option, that the Katy schools will sort of be overrun with entrants from other areas that are not Katy?
I haven't heard that in block walking and discussions like that. That hasn't come up. Most people are worried just about funding being pulled from the school.
Okay, so last question here, just finish up for the day. One of the items that you mentioned is an issue is retention of teachers and support for teachers. You have about 2 minutes. Can you just tell me what your ideas are, what your concerns are, what your intentions are, what your vision is?
So, part of teacher retention is really getting rid of the bureaucracy. That's, to me, is the biggest thing, is simplify their job. They need to focus on the kids. The other thing as well is with teacher retention, it's making sure the parents are also staying involved. I think the parents and teachers have to work hand in hand. It's not so much in the classroom, but my volunteering time in Katy ISD, whether it was as a watchdog at elementary, there's a lot of other activities that go on that teachers need help with that just don't have time for. Those of us who step in and volunteer fill those gaps. At the secondary level, with supporting band programs, loading crews, again, they just need extra support from the community so they can go back and focus on what their tasks are. It's a challenge, and it's so much of what's going on. We got to get back to the basics, get rid of the bureaucracy, and get the student discipline back. Be uniform from campus to campus on student discipline. If you've got a troublemaker at one school who may get a week sent into a certain program, another one's 2 days, you're not following the policies in place. I think if that respect was back, student discipline is uniform and enforced, teachers are more inclined to stay in their roles. They understand the district supporting them, the parents are supporting them. If they have support from those sides, they can feel good about what they're doing. And, again, if somebody got children in the school, have gone through school district, I support teachers as much as I can with the volunteering, whether it's supporting what my kids' activities are to help support the teachers.
Excellent. Very good. Well, again, thank you, David. This is David Olson, candidate for Katy Independent School District School Board School Trustee. And I want to thank you for coming, David. And G2 on the line, thank you very much. This is Chris with the Chris Heasley Radio Show, and we will be here every Monday at 1 o'clock p.m. So please tune in with us next week, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.